If you have ever taught pigeon pose, it's likely that at some point in time you have cued your students to notice where their front shin is in relation to the top of the mat. We sometimes even say that the aim is to bring the shin parallel to the top of the mat. This cue is very dysfunctional on top of pigeon, which is already a dysfunctional pose. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. Now, I want to share with you what else you can cue in pigeon pose that's going to make this pose more functional for your students. I need to first show you how this pose is forceful, because you might believe me and you'll be like, yeah, Janelle, I watch your stuff, I know what you mean. Or you might be sitting there going, well, I don't force my pigeon pose and I don't teach my students to force their pigeon pose. But you don't need to teach any kind of force in pigeon pose. It just is naturally forceful. And I'm going to show you right now why that is. So once we get into pigeon pose, most often we're not lifting and pressing up. We are trying to lower down. So I want you to just take a look at my range here. I have a bit of a gap here. Okay, let's just say, yeah, I can sit down. I'm sinking back. Okay, let's just say you have someone who's sitting down. They've got this flat position more or less, and even if they're up, it's still pretty flat. Okay, let's say they then go ahead and come forward. Then let's say they also bring the shin forward and come forward. Think about those angles. I've got the legs pretty much flat out because the floor, not me, I'm not doing that work. The floor is holding me there. I'm just forcing my body, and then potentially I'm forcing my shin forward as well. Now here's the kicker. I'm going to prove to you how that is forceful. Because if I were to try to create that same shape lying down on my back, I would not be able to. So let's go. Legs straight, external rotation. Here we go. That's it. That is it. I cannot do any more than that. Now, this was not the position that I had on the floor. No, the position that I had on the floor was more like this. It was probably a bit like this, yeah? And it was like this. You don't have to teach students to force in order for the pose to be forceful. It is inherently, naturally, a forceful pose on the body. Now, what does this mean that it's forceful? Well, what it means is that when I'm lying down on my back and I don't have gravity, the floor, holding my body, I can only do a certain amount of range. That's range that my body owns. That's range that my muscles internally are creating. I didn't pull, I didn't push, I didn't shove. I showed you exactly what I could do without any of those external forceful factors. Then I get up and I do pigeon, and all of a sudden, I can go so much deeper in my range. Look at how flexible I am. That's not range that my body owns. You saw the range that my body owned. That was my muscles driving the range. Sitting up is external force driving the range. Now, what happens when we don't own that range in our bodies and we're forcing our bodies to go into a degree of flexibility that the body doesn't own? We do not have the muscles being the primary supporters, holders, absorbers of that force. And therefore, we've got these things left over, the tendons and the ligaments, who have to bear the brunt. And that is not their design to do over and over and over again. So as a result, we see a lot of joint instability in students because of their yoga practice. So you don't have to teach forceful poses. You don't have to emphasize that. These poses are just naturally forceful on the body. So if you are invested in helping your students develop a practice that is more rooted in longevity, sustainability, accessibility, safety, much more connected to, someone's body biomechanics and honoring that, not constantly overriding that, then this video is for you. I'm going to show you some things that you can focus on when you teach them pigeon pose. So the first one is, I kind of already gave you a little bit of a hint of it, and it is to press the ground away, to actually press that front knee down and lift and elevate the body up. Now, yes, generally when we do pigeon, the target area is this front butt cheek, okay, and this back hip flexor. But just because this butt cheek and this part of the hip is actively holding me up doesn't mean that it's not getting some degree of lengthening as well. The lengthening and the strengthening, they can happen together simultaneously. We don't want this to go completely passive because, as you saw in my previous demonstration, I was not able to support it when I was passive, when I went down into my body. And yeah, I can like activate here and there, but at the end of the day, you could see when I laid down on my back, that was not range that was possible for me without gravity forcing me into the stretch. So this is one thing that you can get your students to focus on, is to actually press the ground away. And you can kind of oscillate between doing that and then like lowering just a little bit, and then again lifting up and then letting that soften a little bit. Maybe they have their hands on the ground if they have really long arms, great. Maybe their hands are on blocks and they're just using those a little bit just to give them a tiny bit of support here. So the pressing down of that front knee and that front shin into the ground to give the lift of the body, that is going to be a much more functional way to approach something like pigeon pose and to teach your students about how they understand and how they relate to this front leg. Now, is it possible that they move the shin forward and do that at the same time? Yeah, of course it is possible. However, that is not a range, again, that the body can own. So get your students to flip around, go on their back, see what kind of range they can achieve without external force, get them to feel that range, get them to memorize that range, and then get them to reference that range when they're up in this pose where gravity is likely to push and force them in. And if they're not able to get that external rotation and the shin forward and get all those positions when they're lying down on their back, then it's probably not a good idea for them to explore that degree of range while they are upright and gravity is pushing them down as well. So you can reference this shin and you can get students to play around with where it is, but not if it's going to greatly exceed what it is that they can do while they're lying down on their back. And this leads me into the next thing that you want to get them to pay attention to in this pose is the position of the pelvis. So a lot of times people like to, oh yes, that's so much better. They like to come forward because it takes the strain off of the hip flexor, which makes sense, right? It's like when you're up at a 90-degree angle and you got the back leg here and you've got the body here, there's a lot of force going on. And we can take the exact same kind of exercise that I showed you at the beginning of this video where you can try and create that same shape without force. And I will tell you, it's going to be very, very difficult to do so. So it makes sense that people want to come forward to relieve that and go, oh, yes, that feels so much better. And yeah, in some instances, people are feeling more of the stretch into this front glute. But again, as I showed when I lied down, that is just simply adding more degrees of external force that the body can't support. So you can get your students to find more of a lift so that they don't have to come forward and sag into that front buttocks, yeah? Get them to raise away from the ground so that they don't have to create so much tugging on here. Because the lower the hips go down, the increase of the stretch and torque on this, and it is generally not supported by the activation of the opposing muscles. And that's the next thing that I'm going to get into. But this one I'll just finish off, raising the body up, allowing your students to feel where the pelvis has the capacity to be a little bit more neutral, especially if they're really, really tipped forward and they have a really hard time sitting up. Then get them to lift out of that. And yeah, sometimes we put a block underneath or another kind of prop, and that's not necessarily bad. But again, remember that we want the muscles to drive the range, the activation of the muscles. So the more that we can hold ourselves up away from something instead of just resting on it, the better. The more we're going to be equipping our body with its mechanical resources to support itself, to support its structure. So let's go on to the last thing, and that is this back leg here. So as we come into any kind of range, whether it's up here, whether it's down here, whether we're forward, we really want to look at how this is being lengthened. And what we primarily do is, again, we force that. We force the hip flexor lengthening. So instead, what you can do is get your students to come forward, get them to squeeze this glute, or just simply lift this back leg. You can also get them to bend the knee and do a few little pumps and pulses. This is really great from tabletop. I'm kind of in a partial tabletop with this foot still in that half pigeon. And then once they straighten the leg and they land the toes, they're actually going to keep this glute active, and they're going to slide the leg only to the point that they can maintain this activity of the glute and try to maintain a little bit of a pubic bone to belly button, which we addressed in the previous little kind of point of awareness, and it's all connected, it's all together. So pulling pubic bone a little bit towards the belly button, keeping this active, and if they drop the back knee, still pubic bone pulls to belly button, this glute activates, and maybe there's a little kicker, literally, heel draws in. So that creates activity into this area to create invitational opening into that target area. So pigeon, all of a sudden, essentially it becomes much more functional. And when something becomes more functional in the body and we move in a way that better honors the body's biomechanics, as we're doing here, the practice of yoga becomes more sustainable. And when it's more sustainable, it naturally becomes more accessible. If this is an approach that really resonates with you and you would like to learn more about it, go to the description of this video. There's a link to book a call with me. Book a call. We can have a chat about what that might look like, how I might be able to help you develop this side of your teaching so you can better support your students.